The doorman at the glass tower bowed low and greeted me by a private name only my husband used. The problem was that I had never set foot in that lobby before that day. 40 floors up sat the 4-bedroom penthouse my husband had secretly purchased for his mistress, using offshore accounts. He thought his lies were perfect, but he did not realize that the moment the staff recognized me, his entire empire began to crumble. My name is Madeline Rivera, and I was watching my husband's life end from the comfort of a crushed velvet armchair I had technically owned for 6 months. The silence in the penthouse was heavy, broken only by the hum of the central air conditioning keeping the room at a crisp 68 degrees. Across from me, on the sprawling sectional sofa that cost more than my father's car, Ruben Ruiz was beginning to stir. He looked terrible. The 38-year-old CEO of Lumisphere Labs, the man magazines called the visionary of the decade, looked like a frightened child waking up from a nightmare, only to realize the monster was sitting in the room with him. I took a slow sip of my espresso. It was excellent. The machine in the kitchen was imported from Italy, one of the many amenities Ruben had installed for her. Ruben sat up, rubbing his temples. His eyes were still adjusting to the morning light flooding in through the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. He blinked once, then twice, and then he saw me. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a physical blow. He scrambled backward, his heel catching on the edge of the rug, nearly knocking over a vase of fresh lilies I had placed there earlier. "Madeline," he croaked, his voice cracked from sleep and sudden terror. "What are you doing here? How did you get in here?" I did not answer immediately. I just gestured vaguely with my coffee cup toward the coffee table between us. It was a beautiful table, a slab of raw marble, but it was currently invisible beneath a layer of white paper. I had covered every inch of surface area with them: printed emails, bank statements, screenshots of text messages, photographs, legal contracts. Ruben looked down. His eyes darted across the spread. He saw a photo of himself kissing a woman named Lila in this very room, right by the window where he liked to stand and feel like a god. He saw a printout of a wire transfer for $50,000 with the memo line listed as consulting fees. He saw the deed to the penthouse. "This is insane," Ruben stammered, standing up on shaky legs. He was wearing only his boxers and a t-shirt that said Founder Mode. He looked ridiculous. "You followed me. You broke in. This is trespassing. Madeline, I will call the police. I will have you arrested. Please do," I said, my voice steady. He fumbled for his phone on the side table. I watched him with mild curiosity, like a scientist observing a rat in a maze that had no cheese. He tapped the screen furiously. Face ID unlocked it, but that was where his luck ended. I saw his brow furrow. He tapped again. He swiped. "Why is my service down?" he muttered. He switched to Wi-Fi. That was a mistake. As soon as the connection re-established, his phone began to vibrate. It was a continuous, angry buzz that lasted for 20 seconds straight. Notifications were cascading down his screen. I knew exactly what they were because I had orchestrated the timing perfectly. First, the banks, Chase, Wells Fargo, and the offshore account in the Caymans he thought was invisible, all sending the same automated alert: account frozen due to court order. Then, the emails, his personal Gmail, his encrypted Proton Mail, and his work address. Ruben stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing. "What did you do?" he whispered. "Why can I not access the joint account? Why has my Amex declined? Check your work email." "Ruben," I suggested softly, "the one from the board of directors." He looked at me with pure hatred, but he obeyed. He tapped the icon. I saw his pupils dilate. "Emergency motion to suspend CEO. Pending investigation." He read aloud, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Embezzlement of corporate funds. Misuse of company assets. Madeline, are you out of your mind? I bought this place with my own money." "Did you?" I asked. "Or did you buy it through North Harbor Ventures, LLC, which was funded by a loan from a shell company that lists Lumisphere Labs as its primary creditor?" He froze. "That is complicated finance." "Madeline," he sneered, trying to regain his footing, You would not understand the structure. It is standard practice. I leaned forward and picked up a document from the table. It was the property transfer agreement for the penthouse, dated 6 months ago. You are right. Reuben, I do not understand finance like you do. I am just a UX designer. I just care about the user experience. And the user experience of this contract was very poorly designed. The fine print was too small. I tossed the paper back onto the table. It slid across the marble and stopped right in front of him. You did not even read page 19 when you signed the transfer. Did you? I asked. Reuben looked at the paper. He looked at me. He snatched the document up, flipping frantically to page 19. I watched his eyes scan the legalese. I knew exactly which paragraph he was reading. It was the amendment of his own lawyer, my lawyer's best friend from law school. Though Reuben did not know that had slipped in under the guise of tax optimization. It stated that the controlling interest of North Harbor Ventures was transferred to the Rivera Family Trust, of which I was the sole trustee with veto power over all assets, meaning, technically, he had bought this house for me. And I had just evicted him. No, he gasped. No, this is not legal. You tricked me. This is fraud. I took another sip of coffee. It is only fraud if you can prove I deceived you. Reuben, you signed it? You notarized it. You initiated the bottom of every page. You just assumed that because I was your wife, I was too stupid to understand what I was looking at. I stood up then, walking slowly toward the window. The city looked beautiful from up here. I could see why Lila, his mistress, loved the view. She had posted a photo of it on Instagram 3 weeks ago with the caption, "New Beginnings." You called me easy to manipulate, I said, keeping my back to him, in a text to her. November 14th, 2:30 in the afternoon. You said, "Do not worry about Maddie. She is sweet, but she is not sharp. She believes whatever I tell her." I turned around to face him. Reuben looked like he was about to be sick. The arrogance was gone, stripped away by the sudden, brutal reality of the math. He was a billionaire on paper, but right now, he could not even buy a bagel. You ruined everything, he hissed, his face turning red. For what jealousy? You could have just asked for a divorce. We could have settled. But this is dirty. Madeline, this is war. I shrugged. I did not want a settlement. Reuben, I wanted the truth. And the truth is, you are not a genius. You are just a man who got sloppy. He looked around the room, his eyes wild, looking for an escape. He grabbed his pants from the floor and pulled them on, hopping on one leg, losing his balance. I am leaving, he announced, buttoning his pants with trembling hands. I am going to my lawyer's office. I am going to have this overturned by noon. And when I do, Madeline, I will leave you with absolutely nothing. You will be begging me for bus fare. He marched toward the front door, grabbing his jacket from the coat rack. He looked powerful for a split second, the old Reuben returning, the man who commanded boardrooms and fired people for looking at him wrong. He reached for the door handle. The intercom on the wall buzzed. Reuben stopped. He stared at the panel. It buzzed again. He hit the button. Yes, he barked. I'm coming down. Have my car brought around. There was a pause. Static crackled. Then, the voice of Luis, the head doorman, filled the silent penthouse. His tone was polite, professional, and devastatingly clear. Mrs. Rivera, the voice said. Reuben froze. He looked at the intercom, then at me. Luis continued, speaking only to me. Mrs. Rivera, the gentleman, is requesting to leave the building. Does he have your permission to exit with the property keys, or should we detain him until security arrives? The silence that followed was absolute. Reuben looked at me. For the first time in our 5-year marriage, he was not looking at me as his wife, or his partner, or his dependent. He was looking at me as the person holding the leash. He realized then, in that terrifying heartbeat, that the building staff did not work for him. They worked for the owner of the penthouse, and the owner was sitting on the sofa. His hand dropped from the door handle. He turned to face me, his face pale, his mouth slightly open. He looked small. He looked defeated. He looked like a man who realized he was standing on a trapdoor that had already opened. I watched him for a long moment. I could see the gears turning in his head, trying to calculate a way out, trying to find an algorithm that would solve this equation. But there was no code for this. I did not answer Luis immediately. I let the question hang in the air. Does he have permission? It was a delicious question. But to understand why I let him stand there, sweating in his own living room, waiting for his wife to decide if he was allowed to walk out the door, you have to understand how we got here. You have to understand that I did not wake up this morning and decide to destroy him. I looked at Ruben, shivering in the air-conditioned luxury he had built for another woman, and I felt nothing but a cold, hard satisfaction. To make him kneel in the middle of this penthouse, I had to prepare for more than 1 year. I had to become someone else entirely. Let me tell you about the day everything started. Let me tell you about the day I stopped being the lucky wife of a genius and started becoming his downfall. 14 months before I sat in that velvet armchair watching my husband crumble, I was still living inside the fairy tale, or at least, the version of a fairy tale that gets printed on glossy pages of business magazines. My name is Madeline Rivera. I am 32 years old, and I am a senior user experience designer at Nova Pulse Creative. I have always been good at mapping out how people interact with systems, finding the friction points, and smoothing them out until the user is happy without even knowing why. I thought I had applied that same logic to my marriage. When I married Ruben Ruiz 3 years ago, my friends told me I had won the lottery. I was the daughter of a high school history teacher, and he was the man who had just sold his first AI infrastructure platform to a conglomerate for 9 figures. We lived in a limestone townhouse in Harbor City that cost more than the entire neighborhood I grew up in. Our life was a carefully curated feed of charity galas, art auctions, and dinners where the wine list did not have prices. On the surface, we were the perfect metric of success. Ruben was the genius visionary, the man who barely slept because his mind was too busy inventing the future. I was the supportive, creative wife who kept him grounded. I remember the early days. I remember when Ruben actually worked. I remember him sitting at the kitchen island at 2 a.m, hair messy, eyes bright, explaining neural networks to me over cold pizza. Back then, his ambition felt like a fire that warmed us both. I believed that his success was our success. I believed that when he said he was building an empire, he meant he was building it for us, for the children we talked about having in 2 or 3 years. But wealth changes the texture of a marriage. It replaces intimacy with logistics. The cracks did not appear with a loud bang. They appeared like hairline fractures in a foundation, invisible unless you were looking for them. It started with the schedule. Ruben began to have more off-site meetings. He called them product retreats or founder strategy sessions. He told me that to take Lumasphere Labs to the next level, he needed absolute isolation with his executive team. I believed him. Why would I not? I was a designer, not a tech CEO. I did not understand the demands of running a billion-dollar evaluation company, so when he packed a bag on Friday morning and said he would be back Sunday night, exhausted but happy, I kissed him and told him to drive safe. Then came Thursday afternoon that changed the user interface of my life. I was sitting in my home office on the 2nd floor of the townhouse, organizing our quarterly tax documents. Ruben hated paperwork. He said his brain was too valuable to be wasted on administration, so the task of collating receipts for our personal accountant always fell to me. It was a mundane task, scanning pieces of paper and sorting them into digital folders. I picked up a credit card statement from his personal American Express. It was the black card, the one he used for discretionary spending that did not go through the company. My eyes scanned down the list of charges. A dinner at Le Bernardin for $800, a flight to San Francisco, a tailor on 5th Avenue. And then, a line item that made my finger pause on the trackpad. Skyline Residences, $9,000. I stared at the words. Skyline Residences was not a hotel. It was a residential tower in the financial district. It was a building made entirely of glass and steel, famous for 2 things, its astronomical prices and its discretion. In the circles we moved in, among the wives of venture capitalists and hedge fund managers. Skyline Residences had a nickname. They called it the Mistress Tower. It was where men with too much money and too little conscience stashed the parts of their lives they did not want their families to see. I felt a cold drop of unease in my stomach, but I pushed it down. I was a rational person. I worked with data. One data point is not a trend. When Reuben came home that night, I brought it up. We were in the kitchen, and he was pouring a glass of vintage red wine. I kept my voice casual, just a wife asking about a budget item. "Reuben, what is this charge for Skyline Residences?" I asked. "Did you have a meeting there?" He did not freeze. He did not spill the wine. He just took a sip and turned to me with a look of mild annoyance. The kind a parent gives a child asking a silly question. "Oh, that," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "We are renting a corporate suite there for the quarter. It is for hosting investors from overseas. They prefer the privacy of a residence over a hotel. It is cheaper than booking the Four Seasons every week." He said it so fast. The logic seemed sound, but there was a sharpness in his tone that did not match the mundane explanation. "Why is it on your personal card?" I asked. Reuben set the glass down a little too hard on the marble counter, because the corporate account was flagged for a limit increase and I needed to secure the lease immediately. "Madeline, I will be reimbursed. Why are you interrogating me? Do not turn everything into a drama." Drama. That word hit me like a slap. I had asked 2 questions about a $9,000 charge. That was not drama. That was basic household management. But the way he looked at me, with a sudden flare of hostility, made me recoil. He was rewriting the reality of the conversation, making me the irrational, nagging wife before I had even accused him of anything. I let it go. I told him I was sorry. I told him I just wanted to make sure the accountant had the right notes. He kissed my forehead, but his lips felt dry, and he pulled away a fraction of a second too soon. The next morning, on my commute to Novapulse, I could not get the name of the building out of my head. I was sitting on the train, staring at my tablet, when I overheard 2 men in suits standing near the doors. They were talking loudly, the way men do when they want everyone to know they work in finance. "Real estate is the only way to move it," one of them said. "You set up an LLC. You buy the unit. You put the mistress in it. It is an asset on the balance sheet. If things go south, you sell it. You do not lose money on an affair if you play the market right." The other man laughed. "Yeah, but you have to use a shell company. If your wife sees the deed, you are dead." I turned up the volume on my noise-canceling headphones, but the seed had been planted. It was a poisonous little seed, rooting itself deep in the soil of my insecurities. 3 days later, on a Tuesday night, Reuben was asleep beside me. He was breathing heavily, a deep, dreamless sleep. His phone was on the nightstand on his side of the bed. Usually, he placed it face down. Tonight, he had forgotten. At 2 a.m, the screen lit up, in the darkness of the bedroom. The light was blindingly bright. I rolled over, my heart hammering against my ribs. I did not want to look. I wanted to go back to sleep and wake up in the life where my husband was just stressed about work. But I looked. It was a notification from a parking app. "Thank you, Mr. Ruiz, for using the valet service at Skyline Residences. Your vehicle has been retrieved." I stared at the message until the screen went black again. He had told me the suite was for investors. He had told me it was strictly business, but it was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Why was he retrieving his car from a building for investors in the middle of the night? Or rather, why was the notification coming through now? I realized then that the timestamp was likely delayed, or perhaps he had just left, but he was in bed next to me, which meant he had been there earlier in the day, or the evening. When he told me he was at a board dinner, I did not touch the phone. I did not unlock it. I did not wake him up and scream. I lay back down on my pillow and stared at the ceiling. The shadows from the streetlights outside cast long, gray bars across the room, like a cage. I tried to convince myself I was crazy. I told myself that maybe he had a late meeting there. Maybe he dropped off a client. I told myself that the man I loved, the man who held my hand at my mother's funeral, the man who talked about naming our future daughter Sophia, could not be lying to me with such ease. But the UX designer in me was already waking up. My brain was trained to notice patterns. When a user says one thing but does another, that is a discrepancy. When the data does not match the reported behavior, there is a system error. Reuben turned in his sleep, throwing an arm over my waist. His hand was heavy and warm. It used to feel like protection. Now, it felt like a weight. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I started to replay the last 6 months in my head. The new shirts he bought were not his style. The way he started locking his phone when he went to the shower, the smell of a different laundry detergent on his gym clothes. I had ignored all of it because I wanted the fairy tale to be real. But looking at that dark phone on the nightstand, I knew the fairy tale was over. That was 14 months before the morning in the penthouse. That was the night Madeline Rivera, the trusting wife, began to die. And Madeline Rivera, the woman who would eventually own the building, took her first breath. I did not cry. I just lay there and began to design the most important project of my career. I decided that I would never ask Reuben a direct question again. If he wanted a wife who did not ask where he had been until 2 a.m, I would give him exactly that. I would play the role of the oblivious, trusting spouse so perfectly that he would never suspect the audience was actually taking notes on his performance. The morning after I saw the parking notification, I opened a new folder on my personal laptop. I named it Moodboard Archive. To anyone glancing over my shoulder, it looked like a collection of color palettes and font pairings for a client project at Novapulse. But inside that folder was a spreadsheet that would have made a forensic accountant proud. I treated my marriage like a user experience research project. My husband was the user, and his infidelity was the behavior pattern I needed to map out. I created columns: date, time, stated activity, contradictory evidence. The first entry was the Skyline Residence's parking notification. I typed it in with steady fingers. Tuesday, October 14th, 2:18 in the morning. Stated location home. Asleep. Actual location: Skyline Residence's valet. A few days later, I was in the kitchen making an espresso. Reuben was standing by the refrigerator, talking on his phone. He saw me come in and immediately switched from English to Spanish. He did this often when he was on business calls with international partners, or so I had always assumed. He spoke rapidly, his voice low and intimate. He assumed that my grasp of the language was limited to ordering tapas or asking for directions to the bathroom. He forgot that I had spent 3 years listening to him speak to his mother, his cousins, and his business associates. I understood the context. I understood the tone. I turned my back to him, focusing on the steam rising from the machine. Penthouse, he said. It was the only English word in a stream of Spanish. Then came the phrase that made my hand freeze over the cup. A ella le encanta la vista. She loves the view. He laughed then, a soft, throaty sound that I had not heard him direct at me in months. Claro. El contrato está listo. Sure, the contract is ready. I did not turn around. I poured the coffee, added a splash of oat milk, and walked out of the room as if I had heard nothing but a boring discussion about supply chains. But as soon as I reached my office, I opened the Moodboard Archive. I added a new row. I highlighted it in red. Keywords: penthouse. The view. Contract. I began to observe him with the detached scrutiny of a scientist looking at a specimen under a microscope. I noticed the changes in his wardrobe first. Reuben had always been a creature of habit. He wore navy suits, white shirts, and gray t-shirts. He mocked men who cared too much about fashion. But suddenly, there were new items in his closet. A silk blend shirt with a subtle geometric print, a pair of Italian loafers that cost more than my first car. He started wearing a cologne I had not bought him. It was muskier, heavier than the citrus scent he had worn for 5 years. When I hugged him, I smelled it on his collar, and it made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to smile and tell him he smelled nice. New cologne, I noted in the spreadsheet. October 21st. His hair changed next. Reuben used to go to a barber in the financial district who charged $40 and took 20 minutes. Now, he was coming home with a precision cut that I recognized. It was from a salon in Soho where the appointments were booked months in advance and a haircut cost $300. He was grooming himself for an audience, and I knew I was not it. I started tracking his digital footprint through the few windows he had left open. We shared a calendar application for household logistics. He used it to put in his travel dates, and I used it to remind him of dinner parties. He must have thought I never looked at the daily breakdown of his work schedule. I saw them appearing throughout the month. Gray blocks of time labeled simply board prep or strategy offsite. They were always on Thursday evenings or Friday afternoons. They always lasted 4 or 5 hours. I took screenshots of every single gray block. I cross-referenced them with his credit card statements when I could access them, looking for Uber rides or restaurant charges that matched those times. One evening, Reuben came home late. He walked into the living room and set his laptop bag down on the chair. He went straight to the shower without kissing me. I waited until I heard the water running. Then I walked over to the bag. Usually, Reuben was careless with his technology at home. He would leave his laptop open on the kitchen island, his email logged in. He used to say he had nothing to hide from his partner. I opened the laptop lid. A password prompt stared back at me. He had logged out. He had shut down the machine completely. I did not try to guess the password. I did not try to hack it. I simply closed the lid and placed it back exactly as it had been. The data point was not what was inside the computer. The data point was the fact that he felt the need to lock it. Security measures only increase when the asset being protected becomes more volatile. Reuben came out of the shower smelling of that new, musky soap. He asked if I had seen his phone charger. I pointed to the side table and asked him how his day was. It was brutal, he said, sighing. Just nonstop fires to put out. I nodded sympathetically. I typed into my mental notes. He lies about his day with the same ease that he breathes. The moment that truly crystallized my resolve happened a week later. We were at dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Hudson River. It was supposed to be a date night, an attempt to keep up appearances. The restaurant was dim and romantic, the kind of place where couples held hands across the table. I was telling him about a breakthrough I had made on the interface for a medical app I was designing. It was a project I was passionate about. I was explaining how we had reduced the user error rate by 15%, just by changing the color contrast on the alert buttons. Reuben was nodding. He said, "That is great. Honey, that is really great." But his eyes were not on me. His head was tilted down. His hands were in his lap, below the tablecloth. I could see the faint blue glow of his phone screen reflecting off the white napkin on his lap. He was texting, and then I saw it. A small, private smile played on his lips. It was not the polite smile he gave donors at galas. It was a genuine, unguarded smile. The kind you smile when someone sends you a message that makes your heart skip a beat. I stopped talking mid-sentence. He did not notice. He kept smiling at his crotch, typing a reply with his thumb. I sat there for 10 seconds of silence. He finally looked up, his smile vanishing instantly into a mask of boredom. "Sorry," he said. "What were you saying?" "Something about buttons." I picked up my wine glass and took a long swallow of Pinot Noir. "Nothing," I said. "Just work." That night, I lay in bed and realized that Madeline Rivera had split into 2 people. There was the surface wife. She was the one who wore the silk dresses to the charity auctions. She was the one who held Reuben's arm for the photographers. She was the one who made sure his dry cleaning was picked up and his mother was sent flowers on her birthday. She was warm, accommodating, and unthreatening. Then there was the shadow wife. She was the woman who sat in coffee shops on her lunch break, uploading photos of receipts to a secure cloud server that Reuben did not know existed. She was the woman who memorized the names of the shell companies she heard him mention in his sleep. She was the woman who had stopped crying. I realized with a jolt that I had not cried since the first night I saw the parking notification. The tears had simply evaporated. In their place was a cold, hard clarity. It felt like the focus I entered when I was deep in a complex design problem. Emotions were messy variables that caused bugs in the system. I needed to eliminate the bugs. I needed to operate on pure logic. I looked at Ruben sleeping beside me. He looked peaceful. He thought he was getting away with it. He thought he was managing his two lives perfectly. He did not know that his wife was no longer his partner. I was a researcher conducting a case study on his destruction. But as my spreadsheet grew, as the rows of red text filled the screen, I realized that observation was not enough. I had enough data to know he was cheating. I had enough data to know he was moving money. But I did not have enough power to stop him. Ruben was a billionaire. He had armies of lawyers. He had accountants who could make money disappear into thin air. He controlled the narrative. If I confronted him now, with just a spreadsheet and a few hunches, he would crush me. He would call me crazy. He would hide the assets so deep I would never find them. He would spin a story to the press that I was unstable. I needed more than just screenshots. I needed leverage. I needed to understand the legal architecture of his lies. I needed someone who could look at the digital breadcrumbs I had found and tell me where the loaf of bread was hidden. I closed the mood board archive and opened a new tab. I typed in the name of the only person I knew who understood the dark side of data better than I did. I needed to make a call. I needed to bring in a specialist, because I was done being the victim of this story. It was time to become the author. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of gray, nondescript day that usually blends into the background of a work week. I was sitting in my home office, reviewing wireframes for a fintech app, when my phone buzzed. It was a local number I did not recognize. Usually, I let unknown numbers go to voicemail. I assumed it was a telemarketer or a political campaign, but for some reason, perhaps guided by that strange new instinct that had been growing inside me like a second spine, I picked it up. "Hello, this is Madeline," I said. There was a brief pause, the sound of typing in the background, and then a polite, professional male voice spoke. "Good afternoon. Is this Mrs. Rivera Ruiz?" My maiden name hyphenated with Ruben's. I never used that combination. Legally, I had kept my name for professional reasons. Socially, I was just Mrs. Ruiz. The only place that specific hyphenated combination existed was on our marriage license and our joint tax returns. "Speaking," I said, my hand tightening around the phone. "Who is this I am calling from the concierge desk at Skyline Residences?" the man said. "We have a package here at the front desk for you. It arrived via courier this morning, but the delivery instructions were incomplete. It just says M. Rivera, Unit 47A, since Mr. Ruiz is not answering his cell, and he mentioned that his wife rarely visits the property. We wanted to call you directly to see if you wanted us to hold it or send it up." The world seemed to stop spinning for a second. I sat very still. The air in my office felt suddenly thin. He mentioned that his wife rarely visits. That sentence hung in the air, heavy and grotesque. It implied two things. First, that Ruben had established a residence there. Second, that he had established me as a part of it. I was not a secret to the building staff. I was an absentee owner. I was the wife who was too busy to come to the luxury apartment her husband kept for business. My mind raced. If I said I did not know what he was talking about, the concierge would be confused. He might call Ruben's office. He might alert Ruben. The trap would close before I even stepped inside. I needed to improvise. I needed to accept the user persona that Ruben had created for me without my consent. "Oh, of course," I said, forcing my voice to remain level, smoothing out the tremor of shock. "I completely forgot that I was arriving today. My husband is in meetings all day. Please do not bother him." I paused, calculating. "Actually, I am in the city today." I lied. "I will come by and pick it up myself. I have been meaning to drop by and check on the place anyway." "Wonderful, Mrs. Rivera," the concierge said, sounding relieved. "We will have it ready for you at the front desk. Just ask for Luis." I hung up the phone. I sat there for 1 minute. 60 seconds of absolute silence. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. A frantic, physical rhythm that contradicted the cold clarity in my brain. I was not panicking. I was processing. It felt exactly like receiving a project brief that was missing half the requirements. I had the location, I had the user role. Now I needed to go to the site and conduct field research. I stood up, grabbed my purse, and walked out to the car. Skyline Residences was a building I knew well, but only from the outside. It was a glass needle piercing the sky in the middle of the financial district, a monument to excess and exclusion. I had driven past it 100 times. I had looked at its shimmering blue facade and wondered who lived there. Now I know. I lived there. Or at least, the paper version of me did. The drive took 40 minutes. I parked my car in a public garage 2 blocks away, unwilling to use the valet service and trigger another notification on Ruben's phone. I walked the remaining distance. The wind was biting, whipping my hair across my face, but I did not feel the cold. I felt armored. I pushed through the revolving glass doors and stepped into the lobby. The smell hit me first. It was a custom scent, something expensive and subtle. White tea and sandalwood, pumped through the ventilation system to make sure you knew you had entered a different tax bracket. The floors were black marble, polished to a mirror shine. The ceilings were 30 feet high. It was quiet, the kind of hushed silence that money buys to keep the noise of the city out. Behind a massive desk of carved stone stood a man in a dark suit. He looked up as I approached. He was older, with kind eyes and silver hair combed back perfectly. He smiled the moment he saw me. It was not the polite, guarded smile of a security guard facing a stranger. It was a warm, recognizing smile. "Mrs. Rivera," he said, stepping out from behind the desk. "Finally, you visit us." I stopped. My feet felt rooted to the marble. He knew my face. I had never been here. I had never sent a photo, which meant Ruben had shown him a picture. Or perhaps my face was on a file in their security system, scanned from some ID I did not know I had provided. "I am Luis," he said, extending a hand. "It is very good to meet you in person. Mr. Ruiz speaks of you often, though we regret we see so little of you." I took his hand. It was dry and warm. "It is nice to meet you." "Luis," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, calm and breezy. "Yes, life has been incredibly busy. You know how it is. Ruben is a smart man. I thought, he is an evil genius. He did not hide me. He used me. By registering me as the wife, by using my real name, he legitimized his presence here. He made this apartment look like a family asset, a second home for a wealthy couple. If anyone asked, he was a devoted husband preparing a nest, and the woman he brought here, the woman who actually slept in the bed. She must be introduced as a consultant, a designer, a friend." Luis reached under the desk and produced a small cardboard box. It was wrapped in brown paper. Unassuming. "Here's the package," he said. I took it. It was heavy. My imagination had been running wild on the drive over. I expected lingerie. I expected illicit medication. I expected something tawdry and shameful. I opened the flap of the box right there on the counter, pretending to check the contents. It was a set of 2 whiskey tumblers. They were heavy crystal, beautifully cut. And there, etched into the glass, were 2 initials intertwined in an elegant script, R and L, Ruben and L. I stared at the letters. The L was not for Madeline. This was not a gift for a fling. This was not a hotel room purchase. You do not buy custom monogrammed crystal for a woman you are sleeping with casually. You buy this for a home. You buy this when you are building a life. This was a domestic object. It was an item meant to sit on a shelf for years. It was terrifying. It meant this betrayal had roots. It had infrastructure. I closed the box. "Thank you." "Luis," I said. "Would you like to go up?" Luis asked, holding out a key card. "The elevators are to your right. Unit 47A. The views are spectacular today." I took the card. It was black, sleek, and heavy. I walked toward the elevators. My legs moved on autopilot. I pressed the button. The doors slid open instantly, silent and smooth. I stepped inside and looked at the panel. There were no buttons for floors 1 through 40. There were only buttons for the upper residences, and at the very top, separate from the others, was a single button labeled PHA, 47A. I looked at the directory screen embedded in the wall. It listed the residents by floor. Floor 45 was a duplex. Floor 46 was a duplex, but 47A took up the entire floor. It was the crown jewel. It was the penthouse. My husband had bought the penthouse. I stood there, staring at the button. My finger hovered over it. I could press it. I could go up there right now. I could walk into the room where he was building a life with a woman named Elle. I could smash these crystal glasses against the wall. I could scream until my throat bled. But the shadow wife, the cold observer in my brain, stopped me. If I went up there now, I would just be an angry wife crashing a party. I would see furniture. I would see clothes. But I would not have the full picture. I would not have the legal leverage. I needed to know who Elle was. I needed to know where the money came from. I needed to know how deep the rot went. Going up now was an emotional decision. I needed a strategic one. I let the elevator doors close. I stood in the motionless metal box for 10 seconds. Then I pressed the button to open the doors again. I walked back to the desk. Luis looked up, surprised. Mrs. Rivera, did you forget something? I smiled, a tight, apologetic smile. I am so scattered today. Luis, I said, I just checked my phone and realized I am late for a meeting in Midtown. I do not have time to go up. I will just take the package with me. I handed him back the key card. No problem at all, Luis said. Will we see you next time? Absolutely, I said. Before I turned away, I took a mental photograph of the lobby. I memorized the logo of the property management company on the plaque behind Luis. I memorized the specific layout of the security cameras in the corners of the ceiling. I memorized the fact that Luis had called me Mrs. Rivera with genuine warmth. He was a witness. He was an asset. He just did not know it yet. I walked out of the building, clutching the box of glasses to my chest. I walked back to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and exhaled a breath that felt like it had been held for an hour. I drove home. I hid the box in the back of my closet. Behind a stack of winter coats, Ruben never moved. That night, Ruben came home at 9:30. He looked tired. He loosened his tie as he walked into the kitchen where I was drinking tea. Long day, I asked. He groaned and poured himself a glass of water. Exhausting. I had to have dinner with those investors from the Tokyo firm. We went to that steakhouse on 3rd Avenue. The food was dry and the conversation was even drier. I spent 3 hours talking about regulatory compliance. He rubbed his eyes, looking for sympathy. I watched him. I watched the way he leaned against the counter. The picture of a hardworking husband sacrificing his evening for our future. That sounds terrible, I said softly. It was. He said, I just want to go to bed. He kissed me on the cheek. He smelled of that musky cologne and mints, masking whatever he had actually eaten or whoever he had actually kissed. As he walked up the stairs, I unlocked my phone. I opened the photo gallery. I zoomed in on the picture I had taken of the elevator directory. I cropped it until the screen was filled with just one thing. Unit 47A. He was not at a steakhouse. He was not with investors. He was in the sky, in a glass box he thought was invisible. I looked at the photo, and I did not feel sad. I felt focused. I knew where the target was now. I just needed the right weapon to bring it down. I knew that Unit 47A was the destination, but I had no idea how Ruben had built the road to get there. I was a designer, not a forensic accountant. I understood user interfaces, not the dark, tangled back end of offshore finance. I had discovered the what, but now I needed to understand the how. If I wanted to dismantle his life without blowing up my own, I needed a guide who could navigate the subterranean tunnels of the digital world. I opened my contacts and scrolled to Tessa Moore. We had been roommates in college. While I was sketching wireframes for art projects, Tessa was writing code that could bypass university firewalls so we could stream movies in the dorms. Now, She was a senior cybersecurity analyst for a boutique private investigation firm in Washington. She spent her days hunting down assets for governments and corporations. I pressed the call. Tessa picked up on the second ring. "More," she said. Her voice was clipped, efficient. "Tessa, it is Madeline." There was a pause, a silence that lasted exactly 2 seconds. "Are you safe?" she asked. The question was so sharp, so immediate, that I almost choked. I had not said a word about trouble. I had not called her in 6 months. But Tessa had an instinct for disaster. She could hear the frequency of a crisis in the silence between words. "I am safe physically," I said, keeping my voice steady, "but I have found a bug in the system, a critical one. I need a patch." Tessa did not ask for details over the phone. She knew better. "Meet me at the roasted bean place near your office. 40 minutes. Bring your laptop." We met at a small, industrial-style coffee shop 3 blocks from Nova Pulse Creative. It was the kind of place where everyone was wearing noise-canceling headphones and typing furiously. It was the perfect camouflage. Tessa did not hug me. She did not order me a pastry. She looked at my face, assessed the lack of makeup and the tension in my jaw, and simply opened her laptop. "Tell me the parameters," she said. I told her everything. I told her about the parking notification, the mood board archive, the package from Luis, and the crystal glasses monogrammed with R and L. I kept my report factual, stripping away the adjectives, presenting her with the raw data of my humiliation. Tessa listened without interrupting. Her fingers danced across her keyboard, running scripts I could not understand. When I finished, she turned her screen toward me. "You are looking for a ghost. Madeline," she said, "or rather, a series of ghosts. Ruben is not buying a penthouse in his own name. That would be amateur hour. He is using a structure." She pulled up a diagram. It looked like a family tree, but instead of relatives, it was corporations. "It starts with a shell company," she explained, her voice low and clinical. "A limited liability company, or LLC, that exists only on paper. It has no employees, no office, no product. Its only purpose is to hold a bank account. Let us call that Layer 1. She tapped a key. Layer 2 is usually a trust. A trust provides anonymity. The deed to the penthouse will not say Ruben Ruiz. It will say something generic, like North Harbor Ventures, and the owner of North Harbor Ventures will be the trust, and the beneficiary of the trust. That is where we find Ruben. But how do I prove it, I asked. If it is designed to be hidden, how do I find the link? Tessa smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had just found a footprint. "Because men like Ruben are arrogant," she said. "They think they are smarter than the system. They hire expensive lawyers to build these walls, but then they get lazy with the gatekeeping. They reuse passwords. They link recovery emails to their personal accounts. They back up their phones to the same cloud family plan because they are too cheap to buy extra storage for the secret phone." She looked at me. "Do you have his old iPad? The one he stopped using last year?" I nodded. "It is in the guest room drawer. Bring it to me tonight," she said. "But for now, we are going to set up a mirror, with my permission." Tessa began to construct a digital surveillance system that terrified me with its simplicity. She explained that since Ruben and I shared a legacy family plan for our cloud storage, something we had set up years ago to share photos, she could exploit the permissions he had never revoked. "He thinks he logged out," Tessa said, typing a stream of commands, "but his devices are still shaking hands with the server. We are going to tell the server to send a copy of every backup, every synced note, and every cached document to a secure sandbox I'm creating for you." She called it soft mirroring. It was not technically hacking, she assured me. It was simply utilizing the shared access I already legally possessed as his wife and admin of the family account. Over the next 3 weeks, the data began to flow. It did not come in a flood. It came in droplets, but each droplet was toxic. I would sit in my office at Nova Pulse, designing beautiful, user-friendly interfaces for clients, while in a minimized window, the architecture of my husband's betrayal downloaded itself file by file. The first breakthrough was a PDF. It was an operating agreement for a company called North Harbor Ventures, LLC. The registered agent was a lawyer in Delaware, but the primary funding source was listed as a wire transfer from an account I recognized. It was Ruben's bonus account. Then came the architectural renders. I opened a file named Project Cloud. It was a series of 3D visualizations of an interior. I recognized the floor-to-ceiling windows immediately. I recognized the layout of the kitchen island. It was Unit 47A. But it was not the empty unit. It was fully designed. There were notes in the margins of the PDF in Ruben's handwriting. Make the closet bigger. She has a lot of gowns. Ensure the bathroom soundproofing is top tier. And then, a note that made my blood run cold. Remove the guest bedroom wall. We do not need guests. This is a sanctuary. He was building a fortress, a place where the world could not touch them. But the piece of evidence that truly shattered the last remnants of my denial was an email thread between Ruben and a real estate broker. It had been archived deep in a subfolder, but the mirror pulled it into the light. The subject line was privacy concerns. Ruben wrote, "I need to ensure that this asset is completely decoupled from my primary residence. It must be legally distinct from my marriage. If anything happens to my estate, I want to make sure this property is untouchable by anyone other than the designated beneficiary." Tessa was sitting next to me when I read that one. We were in my living room. The lights dimmed. "He is planning for a future without you," Tessa said softly. "Or at least, a future where you cannot touch his toys." I stared at the screen, decoupled from my marriage. I scrolled down to another document. It was a bank statement from the LLC. It showed a series of outgoing payments. $50,000 for interior design consultation, $12,000 for custom Italian lighting, $8,000 for imported silk rugs. The memo lines were cheerful: gift, surprise, decor. I felt a strange, physical pain in my chest, like a rib had snapped. I remembered a Saturday afternoon, 2 years ago. We were furnishing this townhouse. I had fallen in love with a vintage armchair. It was velvet, a deep emerald green. It cost $500. Ruben had looked at it and scoffed. He said it was frivolous. He said we did not need to waste money on used furniture. He made me feel guilty for wanting a place to sit and read. We argued for 2 hours. I eventually paid for it with my own bonus money, and he refused to sit in it for a month. $500. He had fought me over $500, and here he was, spending $8,000 on a rug for a woman who was not his wife. He was spending millions to build a cage for his affair, and he had done it without blinking. It was not about the money. I realized that as I stared at the transfers, it was about the allocation of resources. He viewed our marriage as a cost center, something to be optimized and reduced. He viewed his life with her as an investment, something to be funded with unlimited capital. I had a budget cut. She was the growth strategy. I closed the laptop. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness. I was vibrating with a frequency that felt dangerously like rage. "I have enough," I said. My voice sounded hollow in the quiet room. "I have an LLC. I have the trust documents. I have the intent to hide assets. I can destroy him with this." Tessa shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "You have information. Information is not a weapon until you sharpen it. If you go to him now, he will hide. He will claim these are business investments. He will claim the girl is an interior decorator. He will bury you in paper until you run out of money to pay your lawyers." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, heavy cardstock rectangle. "You do not need to confront him. Madeline, you need to outmaneuver him. You need a strategy that is colder than his." She slid the card across the coffee table. It was cream-colored with black embossed text. It had a name and a phone number, no email, no website. Helena Ward, Escao. "She is not a nice person," Tessa said. "She does not do mediation. She does not do collaborative divorce. She represents the wives of hedge fund managers and oil tycoons. She specializes in high net worth asset recovery. Basically, she helps women get the money their husbands tried to steal." I picked up the card. It felt sharp against my skin. "Call her," Tessa said. Tell her I sent you. Tell her you have the map to the shell company. And then do exactly what she says. I looked at the name, Helena Ward. It sounded like the name of a general, not a lawyer. I looked back at the screen, at the render of the penthouse bedroom where my husband planned to sleep with someone else. Thank you. Tessa, I said. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my $500 emerald velvet chair, holding the card, waiting for the sun to rise so I could start the war. The elevator ride to the 48th floor of the Sterling Tower was silent and fast. My ears popped as the doors slid open, revealing a reception area that looked less like a law firm and more like the bridge of an interstellar starship. The walls were made of frosted glass and brushed steel. The view behind the reception desk was a sprawling panorama of the bay, the water glittering like crushed diamonds under the midday sun. I walked up to the receptionist. I did not look like a woman whose husband was cheating on her. I was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, my hair pulled back in a severe bun, and I was carrying an encrypted hard drive that contained the digital autopsy of my marriage. I am here to see Helena Ward. I said. The receptionist did not ask for my name. She simply nodded and pressed a button under her desk. Ms. Ward is expecting you. Mrs. Rivera. Helena Ward was a legend in the circles Reuben desperately wanted to be part of. They called her the Dismantler. She did not just handle divorces. She handled corporate restructuring disguised as matrimonial law. When I walked into her corner office, she was standing by the window, looking down at the city as if she owned the zoning rights to every building in sight. She turned around. She was 60 years old, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that were the color of slate. She did not offer me tea or sympathy. She pointed to a leather chair opposite her glass desk. Sit, she said. Tessa tells me you have done your homework. I sat down and placed the hard drive on the desk. It is all there, I said. The shell company, North Harbor Ventures, the bank transfers, the architectural renders of the penthouse, the time-stamped logs of his visits. Helena picked up the drive, plugged it into her computer, and began to read. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the rhythmic clicking of her mouse and the hum of the air filtration system. I watched her face. It was a mask of professional indifference. She scrolled through the evidence of Reuben's betrayal, the emails to the broker, the invoices for the custom silk rugs, the photos of him entering the building with a woman I now knew was named Lila Hart, and she did not flinch. To her, this was not a tragedy, it was a fact pattern. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and took off her reading glasses. This is impressive, she said. Most wives come to me with lipstick on a collar or a vague suspicion. You have brought me a forensic audit. She turned the screen toward me. You have a clear case for adultery. Obviously, she continued, her voice cool and precise, in a standard divorce. This would get you a sympathy vote from the judge and maybe a slightly larger slice of the pie. But you are not here for a slice. Are you Madeline? I looked her in the eye. No. I said, I helped him build Lumisphere. I designed the original interface that got him his first funding. I managed the household so he could sleep 4 hours a night. I do not want a slice. I want to ensure he does not walk away with the bakery while I am left with the crumbs. Helena smiled. It was a terrifyingly sharp expression. Good, she said. Because what we are looking at here is not just infidelity, it is marital asset diversion. He is taking funds that legally belong to the community property, your money, and funneling them into an entity designed to exclude you. North Harbor Ventures is a clumsy attempt at hiding assets. He thinks he is being clever by using a shell company, but he made a fatal error. What error? I asked. He funded it directly from his personal accounts, she said, tapping the screen. He pierced the corporate veil before he even put it on. If we sue now, we can tear this LLC apart in court. She paused, then leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. But if we sue now, we trigger a war. He will hide. He will move the money again. He will claim the penthouse is a corporate investment for Lumisphere, and that the woman is a consultant. It will be messy, public, and expensive. I felt a knot of frustration tighten in my stomach. So what do we do? I asked. I cannot just let him keep playing house in that apartment. We do not sue yet, Helena said softly. We strategize. We turn his own cloak against him. She stood up and walked over to a whiteboard on the wall. She picked up a black marker. Reuben hates details. Correct, she asked. He is a big picture guy, a visionary. He signs things without reading them because he thinks his time is worth $10,000 an hour. Yes, I said, remembering the way he would blindly initial tax returns while watching sports highlights. Helena drew a box on the board. We are going to use that arrogance. We are going to suggest a restructuring of your family estate plan. We will frame it as a tax optimization strategy. We will tell him that to protect his assets from future capital gains taxes, we need to move certain holdings, including North Harbor Ventures, into a new class of trust. She drew an arrow from the box to a circle. The Rivera Family Preservation Trust. She named it. It sounds boring. It sounds safe. It sounds like something his accountant would recommend. He will love it because it strokes his ego about having too much money to tax. And inside that trust document, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, we insert a clause, a simple, standard governance clause. It will state that while Reuben is the primary beneficiary, the role of trustee, the person who actually controls the assets, signs the checks, and holds the keys to the properties will be assigned to you. I stared at the board. He will never sign that. I said, he is a control freak. He is a control freak about his company. Helena corrected, he is lazy about his personal life. We will bury the clause on page 19 of a 40-page document about tax codes. We will have his own lawyer, who I happen to know is currently overwhelmed with a merger, review it. I will send it over as a standard compliance update. If we time it right, perhaps right before he leaves for one of his off-site retreats, he will sign it just to get it off his desk. I sat back, processing the elegance of the trap. If he signs that, I asked, what does it mean for the penthouse? It means, Helena said, returning to her seat, that legally, North Harbor Ventures belongs to the trust, and you control the trust. You become the landlord. You become the one who decides who holds the keys. You effectively steal the house back from under him without him even noticing the lock has changed. But that is not all, she added. She pulled a file from her drawer. I have a contact on the board of Lumisphere Labs, she said, an independent director who has been concerned about Reuben's erratic spending lately. If we can provide quiet, undeniable proof that the CEO is exposing the company to liability by using corporate funds for a personal affair in a property that is now legally disputed, she let the sentence hang in the air. It gives us leverage, I finished for her. It threatens his position at the company. Exactly, Helena said. We do not just threaten his wallet, we threaten his identity. She opened a notebook and uncapped a fountain pen. But to pull this off, Madeline, we need time. We need to draft the documents. We need to get them through his legal team. We need him to sign. We need the banks to process the change of control. And then, we need to wait for the perfect moment to spring the trap. How long? I asked. 6 months, Helena said. The words hit me like a physical weight. 6 months. You need to stay in the house, she said, her tone serious. You need to play the role of the happy, supportive wife. You need to go to the galas. You need to smile when he lies to you about where he is going. You cannot let slip even a hint that you know. If he suspects anything, he will freeze the accounts, and we lose our window. She looked at me, her expression softening just a fraction. Can you do that? She asked. Can you sleep in the same bed as him for 6 months, knowing he is driving to that penthouse to meet her? Can you pour him coffee and ask about his day without screaming? I looked down at my hands. They were steady. I thought about the last 14 months. I thought about the night I found the parking notification. I thought about the crystal glasses with the initials R and L hidden in my closet. I thought about the way he had looked at me across the dinner table last week. His eyes empty, treating me like a piece of furniture he had grown tired of. I had already mourned the marriage. The grief was gone. All that was left was the cold mechanics of resolution. I looked up at Helena. I have withstood it for 8 months already, I said. 6 more months to ensure he cannot buy another penthouse for anyone else. That is a cheap price to pay. Helena nodded slowly. She wrote something down in her notebook. Good, she said. Then we begin. She outlined the next steps with the precision of a military commander. Week 1, drafting the estate amendment. Week 4, presenting it to Ruben's team under the guise of the fiscal year-end review. Week 8, getting the signature. Month 4, quietly transferring the banking authorizations. And then, the endgame. We pick a day, Helena said. A single morning. We filed the divorce petition. We freeze the personal accounts. We serve the eviction notice to the penthouse. We notify the board. It all happens within a 48-hour window. He will be hit from every side before he even realizes the war has started. I listened, taking notes on a pad I had brought with me. I wrote down dates. I wrote down tasks. I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was not reacting. I was designing. I was building a user experience for Ruben that would lead him exactly where I wanted him to go. As the meeting wrapped up, Helena walked me to the door. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the office. You are a dangerous woman, Madeline, she said, and for the first time, she smiled with genuine approval. Most people just want revenge. You want justice. There is a difference. I tightened my grip on my bag. Revenge is emotional. I said, justice is structural. I am just fixing the architecture. I walked out of the office and into the elevator. As the doors closed, I watched the numbers count down. 47, 46. I was going back down to the ground floor, back to the townhouse, back to the lie. But this time, I was not going back as a victim. I was going back as a spy behind enemy lines, with a ticking clock in my pocket and the detonator in my hand. 6 months. I could do 6 months standing on my head. I stepped out into the cool evening air, hailed a taxi, and gave the driver my home address. When I got there, I knew Ruben would be home. I knew he would lie about his day, and I knew, for the first time, I would smile back and lie right to his face, knowing that every lie he told me was just another brick in the wall I was building around him. The next 6 months were the finest acting performance of my life. If there was an Academy Award for marital deception, I would have swept every category. I became the perfect wife. I stood next to Ruben at charity galas in dresses that cost $4,000, tilting my head lovingly when he spoke about the future of artificial intelligence. When reporters from business magazines shoved microphones in our faces and asked about the secret to keeping a marriage alive while running a billion-dollar empire, I looked them dead in the eye and smiled. Trust, I would say, squeezing Ruben's arm just tight enough to feel the muscle tense beneath his tuxedo. Absolute, unwavering trust, and knowing that we are building a legacy together, Ruben would beam. He loved that line. He loved the optics of the devoted, intelligent wife who understood his genius but never challenged his authority. He had no idea that the legacy I was building involved a demolition crew and a team of forensic accountants. The trap Helena Ward had designed was elegant in its simplicity, and Ruben walked into it with the confidence of a man who believed he was the smartest person in every room. It happened on a Tuesday morning over breakfast. Ruben was in a good mood. He was eating an egg white omelet and reading a briefing on his tablet. My legal team came up with a brilliant new structure for the estate, he said, tapping the screen with his stylus. It is strictly for tax optimization. We move some of the more volatile assets into a preservation trust. It shields them from capital gains and liability. It is really high-level stuff. Madeline, I poured myself a cup of coffee, keeping my hand steady. That sounds smart, I said casually. Do you need me to do anything? Just sign the spousal consent form, he said, sliding a thick stack of papers across the marble island. I already initiated the main restructuring. It moves the secondary holdings like the venture arm and the real estate LLCs under a new umbrella. He did not even look up. He did not realize that the new umbrella was held by a hand that was currently pouring oat milk into his coffee. I picked up the pen. I pretended to skim the first page. Is this the one Helena sent over? I asked innocently. Or your guy? My team reviewed it, he said, waving a hand. Standard boilerplate. Just sign on the tabs. I signed. I watched him sign. I watched his initial page 19, the page that explicitly designated me, Madeline Rivera, as the primary trustee with veto power over the assets of North Harbor Ventures. He signed away his penthouse, his sanctuary, and his secret life, all because he was too arrogant to read the fine print of a document his wife handed him. 2 days later, I received an encrypted email from Helena's office. Subject transfer complete. Attached was the filed deed. North Harbor Ventures was now a subsidiary of the Rivera Family Preservation Trust. I was the trustee, technically, legally, and irrevocably. I was now Ruben's landlord, but the secrets did not stop there. Tessa, my friend and digital bloodhound, found another layer to the betrayal that made the situation even more volatile. Ruben was not just using the penthouse for romance, he was using it for business. Tessa's mirroring system flagged a series of calendar invites that Ruben had hidden under the code name Project Blue. These were not dates with his mistress. These were high-stakes meetings with unregistered investors, people who wanted to put money into Lumisphere Labs without showing up on the official books. He is mixing the streams, Tessa told me one evening as we reviewed the logs. He is bringing unauthorized third parties into a property funded by company assets that he is trying to hide from you. If the Securities and Exchange Commission found out he was hosting off-book investor meetings in a secret penthouse, he would not just lose his marriage, he would lose his CEO title. He might even go to jail. This was the leverage Helena had talked about. It was the nuclear button. And then, there was the girl. We finally put a name to the face I had seen in the lobby. Lila Hart. She was 26 years old. She described herself on social media as a brand strategist and lifestyle curator. Her Instagram feed was a curated collection of beige outfits, latte art, and vague, inspirational quotes about manifesting your dreams. But the mirroring revealed a much messier reality. Lila was not single. She had a boyfriend of 4 years, an orthopedic surgeon named Marcus, who was currently doing a fellowship in Boston. I sat in my office and read the group chat logs Tessa had intercepted from Lila's phone. She was bragging to her friends about her double life. He is totally obsessed with me. Lila wrote to a friend named Chloe. He bought this insane penthouse just for us. He says he is going to leave his wife soon. He is just waiting for the right time because she is emotionally fragile. He is going to let her keep the townhouse because she cannot handle change. I read the words emotionally fragile and laughed out loud. It was a cold, dry sound. Lila continued, "This place is our future. Though, I am already picking out new curtains for the master. The ones he has now are too masculine." She had no idea that the woman she called fragile was currently approving the payment for the electricity bill that powered her curling iron. That was the twist that Ruben had missed. Because the utilities for the penthouse were registered to North Harbor Ventures, and North Harbor Ventures was now managed by the trust. The bills started coming to me. Ruben's assistants used to handle them. But once the legal address changed to the trust's P.O. box, which forwarded to my email, I saw everything. I saw how much water they used. I saw the cable bill with the premium movie channels. I saw the cleaning service fees. I paid them all, promptly, from the trust account. I became a ghost in the machine of his affair, keeping the lights on while he plotted to leave me in the dark. I also started visiting the building, not to see Ruben, but to cement my role. I would go during the day, when I knew Ruben was at the office. I met with the building management to sign updated safety protocols for the trust. Luis, the doorman, became my greatest ally. Though he did not know it, "Mrs. Rivera," he would say, opening the door for me. "Good to see you. The window washers are coming next week for Unit 47A. Just wanted to let you know. Thank you. Luis," I would say, smiling warmly, "please make sure they are careful with the terrace. My husband is very particular about the glass." To the staff, I was the attentive, responsible owner. Ruben was just the husband who used the place occasionally. I was the one signing the checks. I was the one they wanted to keep happy. Then came the afternoon that tested every ounce of my resolve. I had timed my visit to the management office intentionally. I knew from the mirrored calendar that Ruben was leaving the office early for a site inspection. I knew from the intercepted texts that Lila was meeting him there. I was standing in the lobby, talking to the building manager about the HVAC maintenance schedule, when the revolving doors spun. Ruben walked in. He was wearing his favorite navy suit, looking powerful and relaxed. And holding his hand, interlaced fingers and all, was Lila Hart. She looked exactly like her photos. Perfect hair, expensive coat. Looking up at him with wide, adoring eyes. They were laughing. They looked like a couple who owned the world. Then, Ruben looked up. He saw me. For a second, the time in the lobby seemed to warp. The laughter died in his throat. His face went slack. He stopped walking so abruptly that Lila stumbled slightly in her heels. Madeline, he choked out. Luis, who was standing behind the desk, looked between us with wide, panicked eyes. He saw the wife standing by the elevators. He saw the husband holding hands with another woman near the door. He braced himself for a scene. He expected to scream. He expected me to throw something. I did neither. I turned slowly, smoothing the front of my blazer. I looked at Ruben. I looked at his hand holding hers. Then I looked at Lila. I let my gaze travel over her face for exactly 1 second, with the mild, uninterested politeness one gives to a stranger in an elevator. Then I looked back at Luis. "Thank you for sorting out that maintenance issue." "Luis," I said, my voice perfectly calm, "I will expect the email confirmation by tomorrow." I walked toward the door. I had to walk right past them. Ruben was paralyzed. He had snatched his hand away from Lila, as if her skin had suddenly turned into burning coal. He stood there, mouth gaping, unable to form a sentence. "Madeline," I stammered. I did not stop. I did not slow down. I nodded to him as I passed. A brisk, professional nod. "Ruben," I said, and then I walked out the door. I did not look back. I stepped onto the sidewalk, hailed a taxi, and got in. Only when the car turned the corner did I allow myself to exhale. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my teeth. But I had done it. I had looked the devil and his mistress in the eye, and I had not blinked. 20 minutes later, my phone vibrated. It was the mirror system. A text from Lila to Ruben. Oh my God, that was her. Does she know? Ruben? She looked right at us. I watched the 3 dots of Ruben's reply bubble appear and disappear for a full minute. He was typing, deleting, retyping. He was panicking. Finally, his message came through. "No, she does not know. She barely looked at you. She thinks you are a colleague. She trusts me implicitly. Lila, she is in her own world. Do not worry. I have this under control." I sat in my living room, the room Ruben thought was the only home I knew. On my lap was the final draft of the divorce petition Helena had sent over an hour ago. I read his text again. She trusts me implicitly. I looked down at the legal document. Paragraph 4 detailed the immediate freezing of all marital assets. Paragraph 7 demanded full custody of the penthouse at Skyline Residences based on the trust deed he had signed. I started to laugh. It was a quiet laugh. Shaking my shoulders in the empty house, he thought he had it under control. He thought I was a fool. I picked up my phone and texted Helena. "I will sign the final draft this afternoon." I wrote, then I texted Tessa. "He is digging his own grave. Let us get the shovel ready." Ruben came home late that night, smelling of fear and breath mints. He watched me carefully as I read a book on the sofa. He was waiting for the explosion. He was waiting for me to ask who the girl was. I looked up and smiled. "Did you have a good day?" "Honey," I asked. He let out a breath he must have been holding for hours. "Yeah," he said, his shoulders sagging with relief. "Just a lot of meetings, boring stuff." I went back to my book. "Glad to hear it." I said. I turned the page. The chapter was titled, "The Art of War." We needed the smoking gun. Or rather, we needed the high-definition video of the smoking gun being carried into the penthouse along with a bag of organic groceries. Helena Ward was a believer in the concept of overkill. She told me that in a high-stakes divorce, you do not just want to win, you want to make the other side realize that fighting is mathematically impossible. We had the paper trail, we had the bank transfers, We had the trust documents that legally gave me control of the property, but papers can be argued in court. A judge can get bored with spreadsheets. No one gets bored watching a video of a husband kissing his mistress in an elevator. On a Thursday morning, I walked into the management office of Skyline Residences. I was not alone. Helena was with me, wearing a suit that looked sharp enough to cut glass. The property manager, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, tried to stop us at the door. "Mrs. Rivera," he said, glancing at his appointment book. "I did not know you were coming in. Is there an issue with the unit?" "There is a significant security concern regarding the assets held by the trust," Helena said before I could speak. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking a desk. As the legal representative for the trustee, Mrs. Rivera requires immediate access to the entry logs and the hallway security footage for the past 90 days. Mr. Henderson blinked. "I'm afraid that is against our privacy policy. We protect our residents." Helena placed a document on his desk. It was the deed I had tricked Ruben into signing. "Mrs. Rivera is the resident," Helena said. "Or rather, the trust she controls is the owner of record. You are currently denying the owner access to security data regarding her own property. If there is unauthorized access happening in Unit 47A and you block us from investigating it, the liability falls directly on this management company." She let the word liability hang in the air. In the world of high-end real estate, liability was a terrifying word. Mr. Henderson looked at the document. He looked at me. Then he looked at Luis, the head doorman, who was standing quietly in the corner. "Give them the access codes," Mr. Henderson said, wiping sweat from his upper lip. 10 minutes later, we were standing in the server room. It was cold and hummed with the sound of cooling fans. A wall of monitors displayed the silent, gray pulse of the building. Luis pulled up the files for the 47th floor. "Madeline, are you ready?" Helena asked. I nodded. "Play it. For the next hour." I watched a silent movie of my marriage disintegrating. I saw Ruben and Lila entering the elevator on a Friday night. They were not standing apart like colleagues. Lila was leaning into him, her head resting on his shoulder. As the doors closed, he turned and kissed her. It was not a quick peck. It was a slow, deep kiss, the kind he had not given me in 3 years. I watched them carry bags from Dean and DeLuca. I watched them bring in a large, wrapped painting. I watched Lila come in alone on a Tuesday afternoon, using a key card he had given her, carrying a garment bag. It was domestic. That was the part that hurt more than the sex would have. They were playing house. They were building a routine. I stood there, arms crossed, my face blank. Inside, I felt like I was swallowing glass, but I did not look away. I needed to burn this image into my retinas so that I would never, ever feel a moment of hesitation again. "Wait," Helena said suddenly. "Pause that." Luis froze the frame. It was a timestamp from 3 weeks ago, 1 in the morning on a Wednesday. Ruben was entering the penthouse, but he was not with Lila. He was with a man. "Zoom in on the guest," Helena commanded. The image pixelated slightly, then cleared. The man was older, balding, with a distinctive heavy-set jaw. I recognized him immediately. "That is Simon Vance," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Who is Simon Vance?" Helena asked, though I suspected she already knew. "He is a board member at Lumisphere," I said. "He is the head of the audit committee." Helena let out a low whistle. "Ruben is supposed to report all meetings with board members to the corporate secretary," I explained, "especially private ones. If he is bringing Vance here, to an off-the-books property, in the middle of the night, they are cooking something." Helena finished. "They are discussing company business outside of official channels. Maybe a merger. Maybe hiding losses. Whatever it is a violation of his fiduciary duty." She turned to me, her eyes gleaming. "This is better than the affair. Madeline, the affair gets you a divorce. This footage gets you his silence." "Should we use it?" I asked. "Not yet," Helena said. "We keep this in our back pocket. This is the nuclear option. If Ruben tries to fight you on the settlement, if he tries to drag your name through the mud or hide money, We let him know we have this tape. He will sign anything to keep the SEC from seeing it. We downloaded everything, gigabytes of betrayal, saved onto an encrypted drive. As we walked out of the server room, Luis walked us to the lobby. The lobby was empty. Mr. Henderson had retreated to his office to hyperventilate. Luis pressed the button to call the elevator for Helena, but he held the door open for me. "Mrs. Rivera," he said quietly. I turned to him. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He was a man who prided himself on discretion, on seeing everything and saying nothing. But he was also a decent man. I always wondered, he said, his voice low so the other staff could not hear. "I wondered why you never came up with him. He told us you preferred the country house. But seeing that woman, seeing her come here every week," he stopped, then looked me in the eye. "It was not right. Mrs. Rivera, this is your home." I felt a sudden sting of tears. The first emotion I had shown all day. This man, a stranger who opened doors for a living, had shown me more loyalty in 5 minutes than my husband had in 5 years. "Thank you, Luis," I said. "I am going to take it back." He nodded, a small, grim smile on his face. "If you need the logs for the service elevator," he whispered, "let me know. They use that one twice to bring in furniture late at night." I smiled. "You are a good man." "Luis." When I got home, I initiated the next phase of the plan, using my authority as the trustee of the Rivera Family Preservation Trust. I drafted a formal letter to the tenant North Harbor Ventures. The letter stated that the property management company required a mandatory inspection of the unit to verify compliance with new city fire codes and to review the lease terms regarding occupancy limits. I set the date for Friday morning at 9 o'clock. I sent the notification to Ruben's office email, but I flagged it as high importance from the building management. I knew how Ruben worked. He would see an administrative hassle. He would try to ignore it, but I had Helena call his executive assistant, pretending to be the building's legal counsel, threatening to revoke the access cards if the owner of record was not present for the inspection. Ruben, annoyed and arrogant, took the bait. "I will handle it." He texted me that night, "I have to stop by that investment property on Friday morning. Some bureaucratic nonsense with the building manager. I will be a little late to the office. Take your time." I texted back, "Good luck." But I was not the only one tightening the screws. Tessa had been busy. She had not hacked Lumosphere that would be illegal, but she had utilized an anonymous whistleblower portal that the company was required by law to maintain. She submitted a tip. It was vague but alarming. It suggested that the ethics committee should audit the CEO's reimbursement requests for client entertainment at a location called Skyline Residences. It was just enough to trigger an internal inquiry. 2 days before the Friday showdown. Ruben came home looking pale. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He rubbed his face. "Just work stress. The board is being difficult about some expenses. It is nothing, just paperwork." He was lying. I knew he had received an email from the head of the ethics committee that afternoon asking for a meeting. He was being squeezed from both sides. At work, his financial impropriety was being questioned. At his secret home, his sanctuary was being invaded by inspectors. He thought he was having a bad week. He had no idea he was living through the final days of his life as he knew it. On Thursday night, the night before the inspection, I sat in my kitchen. The house was quiet. Ruben was upstairs, probably texting Lila, telling her to stay away from the penthouse tomorrow morning because of the boring building meeting. I looked at my phone. The calendar alert for Friday, 9 o'clock in the morning, was glowing on the screen. I had named the event Inspection, but that was not what it was. At 9 o'clock, Helena would file the divorce papers electronically. At 9 o'clock, the bank freeze orders would hit his accounts. At 9 o'clock, the courier would deliver a formal letter to the board of directors at Lumosphere, informing them of a potential conflict of interest regarding the CEO's assets. And at 9 o'clock, I would be sitting in the penthouse, waiting for him to walk through the door. I checked the time. It was 11:42 at night. 10 hours left. I turned off the kitchen light and walked upstairs. I climbed into bed next to my husband. I listened to his breathing. I wondered if he was dreaming of her. Sleep well. Reuben, I thought, this is the last time you will ever sleep in a house you think you own. The morning sun was hitting the glass facade of Skyline residences with blinding intensity when Reuben pulled his Aston Martin into the valet circle. It was 9 o'clock on a Friday. In his mind, this was a 20-minute detour. He believed he was here to meet with the building manager to approve a wiring upgrade for a new surround sound system that Lila had insisted upon for movie nights. He checked his watch, annoyed at the inconvenience, already mentally rehearsing the excuse he would give his assistant for being late to the office. He tossed the keys to the valet without looking at him. He smoothed the lapels of his navy suit, grabbed his briefcase, and marched toward the revolving doors. He was the master of his universe, a man who moved obstacles with a checkbook. He walked into the lobby, the scent of white tea and sandalwood greeting him. Luis was standing behind the marble desk. He did not smile. He stood straighter than usual, his hands clasped behind his back. "Good morning, Mr. Ruiz," Luis said. "Morning, Luis," Reuben said, not breaking stride, heading for the elevators. "Is the manager upstairs? I do not have all day." Luis cleared his throat. It was a small sound, but it echoed in the quiet lobby. "Actually, sir, Mrs. Rivera is already upstairs waiting for you." Reuben stopped. His Italian leather shoes squeaked against the polished floor. He turned slowly, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. "Excuse me," Reuben asked. "Who is upstairs, Mrs. Rivera?" Luis repeated, his voice devoid of any inflection. "She arrived 10 minutes ago. She said you were expecting her for the inspection." Reuben stood frozen. His brain tried to process the data, but it returned a fatal error. Madeline never came here. Madeline did not know this place existed. Madeline was supposed to be at her office, designing wireframes, oblivious and safe in the little box he had put her in. Maybe she meant Lila. But Luis knew Lila. He knew her as the consultant. He would never call her Mrs. Rivera. Reuben felt a cold prickle of sweat on the back of his neck. "Right," he said, his voice tight. "Of course, my wife." He turned back to the elevators, his heart rate beginning to climb. He pressed the call button. The doors opened instantly. He stepped inside and swiped his black keycard. Usually, the small LCD screen on the control panel would flash a green light and display "Welcome Resident." Today, it beeped once, a long, low tone. The text on the screen changed. "Access granted. Authorized by Rivera Family Preservation Trust." Reuben stared at the glowing blue letters. Rivera Family Preservation Trust. He knew those words. He had seen them before. He searched his memory, digging through the piles of documents he signed every week without reading. Then he remembered the tax optimization strategy, the dinner at the Italian restaurant 6 months ago, the heavy stack of papers Madeline had slid across the table while he was ordering tiramisu. He had signed it. He had moved North Harbor Ventures into the trust. The elevator shot upward, but Reuben felt like his stomach had dropped into the basement. At that exact moment, 5 miles away in a glass-walled office, Helena Ward pressed the enter key on her keyboard. It was the digital equivalent of a firing squad. 3 emails were sent simultaneously. The first went to the family court database, filing a petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery and financial misconduct. The second went to the compliance departments of Chase, Wells Fargo, and the private bank in the Caymans, attaching a court order to freeze all assets pending a forensic audit. The third went to the board of directors of Lumosphere Labs. The subject line was "Notice of Undeclared Related Party Transactions and Potential Breach of Fiduciary Duty." Reuben knew none of this yet. He only knew that the elevator doors were opening on the 47th floor. He stepped into the penthouse. The morning light flooded the room, illuminating the custom silk rugs he had bought for Lila, the velvet sofas, the view he was so proud of. And sitting in the center of it all, on the white sectional, was me. I was wearing a white suit. I had a cup of espresso in my hand. I looked calm. I looked at home. Reuben stopped in the entryway. He looked at me, then at the coffee table. The marble surface was covered. Photographs, bank statements, the deed to the penthouse. and a stack of printed screenshots from the building's security cameras. "Madeline," he whispered. I took a sip of coffee. "Hello?" "Reuben," I said. He took a step forward, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for a hidden camera, or perhaps looking for Lila. "What is this?" he stammered. "How did you get in here?" "I have the keys." "Reuben," I said, "I have had the keys for 6 months, since you signed the property over to me." He looked at me blankly. "I never did that." "Page 19, I said softly. "The estate restructuring. You were so busy telling me about the wine list that you did not notice you were making me your landlord." Reuben's face went gray. He walked toward the table and looked down. He saw a photo of himself kissing Lila in the elevator. He saw a photo of Simon Vance entering the apartment at 1 in the morning. His hand reached out to touch the paper, shaking. "Madeline, wait," he said, his voice rising in pitch. "This looks bad. I know, but I can explain. This is just an investment property. That woman, she is just a designer helping me stage it for resale." I did not answer. I just pointed to his phone, which he had placed on the table. It vibrated, then it vibrated again, and again. It was a continuous, angry buzzing that rattled against the marble. Reuben looked at the screen. Notification, Chase fraud alert, account ending in 452 frozen. Notification, Wells Fargo, access denied. Notification, Amex Centurion, card suspended. He looked up at me, terror in his eyes. "What did you do?" he gasped. "Keep reading," I said. Another notification popped up. This one was an email. It was marked urgent. It was from the chairman of the board of Lumosphere. Reuben picked up the phone. His fingers fumbled as he unlocked it. He read the preview text aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "Emergency board meeting, 10 a.m. Agenda immediate suspension of CEO pending investigation into misappropriation of funds and ethics violations." He dropped the phone. It clattered onto the table. "You are destroying me," he said. He sounded shocked, as if the idea that I could hurt him was physically impossible. "I am the CEO. I built that company. You cannot just turn it off." I stood up then. I walked around the table until I was standing right in front of him. I did not turn it off. "Reuben, you did. You turned it off the moment you decided that your marriage was just a shell company for your lies." I walked him through the timeline. I told him about the parking notification 14 months ago. I told him about the package Luis gave me. I told him about Tessa and the mirroring. I told him about the night he signed the trust amendment while I ate my pasta and watched him sign away his freedom. He listened, his mouth slightly open, his posture collapsing with every sentence. He realized that while he thought he was playing a sophisticated game of chess, I had been the one designing the board. When I finished, there was a long silence. Reuben looked at me. He looked at the luxury apartment that was supposed to be his escape, and then he said the thing that made me realize I had made the right decision. He did not apologize. He did not ask for forgiveness. He threw his hands up and shouted, "I just wanted her to be safe. I wanted to give Lila a safe place. You have the townhouse. You have social status. You have everything else. Madeline. Why couldn't you just let me have this one thing?" I stared at him. In his mind, I was the greedy one. In his mind, dividing his assets between a wife and a mistress was a fair distribution of wealth. He saw us not as people, but as cost centers. I was the primary residence. She was the satellite office. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a blue folder. I handed it to him. "Here is the divorce agreement," I said. "It is already signed by me. It gives you a choice. You can sign it now, agree to the terms, and I will keep the video of you and Simon Vance private. The board will still fire you, but you might stay out of prison." "And if I do not?" he asked, a flicker of his old arrogance trying to ignite. "Then I sent the video to the SEC. I said, "And I send the photos of you and Lila to the press." He looked at the folder. He looked at the door. "I need to think," he muttered. "I need to call my lawyer. I am leaving." He turned and walked fast toward the elevator. He needed to get out of this box. He needed to get back to the world where he was in charge. He reached the door. He grabbed the handle. The intercom on the wall buzzed. Reuben jumped as if he had been shot. He stared at the speaker. It buzzed again. I walked over and pressed the button. Yes. Luis, I asked. Luis's voice came through, clear and calm. Mrs. Rivera, the valet, is asking about the Aston Martin, and I wanted to check. The gentleman is attempting to leave. There was a pause. Does he have your permission to exit the premises? Luis asked. Or should we call security to detain him for trespassing? Reuben froze. He looked at the door handle in his hand. Then he looked at me. For the first time, he understood the reality of geography. This was not his penthouse. This was not his sanctuary. He was standing in my house. He was standing on my floor. He was a guest, and a guest could only leave if the host allowed it. The silence stretched out. I watched him crumble, the billionaire, the visionary, the man who thought he could own 2 women, was waiting for his wife to tell the doorman if he was allowed to go outside. I held the button down. I looked Reuben in the eye. I waited 5 seconds, long enough for him to feel the walls closing in, long enough for him to realize that the key in his pocket was useless. Give him 15 minutes. Luis, I said, if he is not out by then, call the police. I released the button. Reuben slumped against the door. He slid down until he was sitting on the floor. The divorce papers clutched in his hand. The sound of his breathing was the only noise in the room. Sign it, Reuben, I said, sitting back down on the sofa and picking up my coffee. You are on the clock. Give him 15 minutes, I said into the intercom, my voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. If he remains on the premises after that time, please process him as you would any unauthorized individual attempting to occupy a trust asset. Call the police if necessary. I released the button and turned back to face my husband. Reuben looked as though his legs had been removed. He slumped downward, his expensive suit fabric straining as he hit his knees on the rug he had imported from Milan. It was a pathetic sight. The titan of industry, the man who claimed to see the future, was kneeling on the floor of his own secret hideout, looking up at me with wet, terrified eyes. Why did you not say anything? He asked, his voice cracking. He gestured helplessly at the table covered in evidence. You watched me. For more than a year. You just watched me. Why? Madeline. We could have fixed this. We could have gone to counseling. I could have stopped. I looked at him, and then I looked at the photo near his knee. It was a high-resolution shot of him lifting Lila into his arms in the elevator, her legs wrapped around his waist. You could have stopped, I repeated flatly. But you did not want to stop. Reuben, you wanted to expand. You wanted the wife in the townhouse and the mistress in the penthouse. You wanted the best of both worlds because you believed you were entitled to it. I walked over to the window, looking out at the city that looked so small from this height. I did intend to leave quietly. At first, I said, keeping my back to him, when I found the parking receipt 14 months ago, I thought about just packing a bag and disappearing. I thought about filing for divorce and asking for a standard settlement. I was sad then. I was heartbroken. I turned around to face him, but then I started reading your messages. I read what you wrote to her about me. You called me the sweet, clueless wife. You told her I was easy to manage. You told her I would never leave the townhouse because I was too afraid of change. You laughed at me. Reuben, you mocked the very loyalty that made me a good wife. He flinched. He remembered those texts. I could see the memory washing over him. That was the moment I decided I was not leaving. I said, that was the moment I decided that if you wanted a clueless wife, I would play the role until the curtain fell. I wanted you to see exactly who I was. I wanted you to realize that the woman you called stupid was the one holding the pen when you signed your life away. Reuben looked down at the floor. He had no defense. The arrogance that had fueled his affair was the same arrogance that had blinded him to the trap. I walked back to the table and tapped the deed with my fingernail. You bought this place for her. I said, you spent millions of dollars creating a sanctuary for Lila. You promised her it was her future. But here's the reality. Reuben, from the moment the trust assumed control, this apartment became my property. Every time you brought her here, you were bringing her into my house. Every time you slept in that bed, you were sleeping on my furniture." I paused, letting the weight of it settle on him. If Lila thought this was her future home, I added, then her future has officially been foreclosed, as if summoned by her name. Ruben's phone on the table lit up again. It had been buzzing intermittently, but now it was a constant stream of notifications. I glanced down at the screen. The preview messages were visible. "Where are you?" Lila wrote. "Ruben, answer me." "Marcus just packed his bags. He knows. He knows everything. I heard the board is seizing your company email." "What is happening, Ruben? Please tell me we still have the apartment. I have nowhere to go." I looked at Ruben. He was staring at the phone, but he did not reach for it. He could not help her. He could not even help himself. The ecosystem he had built to support his double life was collapsing, and the debris was burying everyone involved. I picked up the last document from my briefcase. It was a single sheet of paper, heavy and cream-colored. "This is a private settlement agreement," I said, placing it on top of the divorce papers. Ruben looked at it warily. "What is this?" "It is an offer," I said. "If you sign the divorce papers today, uncontested, and agree to the asset division I have outlined, I will agree to a non-disclosure clause regarding the specific evidence gathered in this penthouse." I pointed to the stack of printed screenshots from the security camera. "The board already knows about the financial irregularities," I said, "but they do not have the video of you bringing Simon Vance here for secret meetings. They do not have the footage of the drug use at your parties, and the financial press does not have the photos of you and your mistress." Ruben went pale. He knew what that footage would do. Losing the CEO title was one thing. Facing criminal charges for insider trading or having his reputation permanently incinerated on the front page of the Wall Street Journal was another. "If you sign," I continued, "I keep the footage in a vault. It never leaks. You get to resign for personal reasons. You keep a shred of your dignity, and if I do not," he asked hoarsely, "then I release everything." I said, "And you leave here with nothing but the suit on your back and a subpoena." Ruben looked at the pen. He looked at the phone, which was still buzzing with Lila's panic. He looked at the apartment he had loved so much. He realized then that he had never really been the owner. He had just been a squatter in a life he could not afford. He reached out and took the pen. His hand was shaking so badly that the tip tapped against the paper. He signed. He signed the divorce. He signed the transfer orders. He signed the settlement. With each stroke of the pen, he surrendered another piece of the empire he had built on lies. He signed away the money, the properties, and the control. He signed away his pride. When he finished, he dropped the pen. It rolled across the marble table and fell to the floor with a soft click. "It is done," he whispered. I gathered the papers and placed them neatly back into my folder. "Yes," I said, "it is done." I picked up the intercom again. "Luis," I said. "Yes, Mrs. Rivera." "Mr. Ruiz is leaving now," I said. "However, there are reporters gathering at the front entrance. Rumors about the board meeting have leaked. Please escort him out through the service entrance in the basement. I do not want a scene in the lobby." I looked at Ruben. It was a final act of mercy, or perhaps a final act of control. I was protecting the building. My building. From the circus. "Service entrance," Ruben muttered, standing up slowly. "You are sending me out with the trash." I looked at him calmly. "It is the only exit that is safe. Ruben, take it." He looked at me one last time. There was no love left in his eyes, only a deep, hollow shock. He looked like a man who had woken up in a different reality. He turned and walked toward the door. He did not look back at the view. He did not look back at the phone buzzing with Lila's desperate messages. He walked out of the penthouse, shoulders hunched, a defeated man leaving the stage. The door clicked shut behind him. The silence returned instantly. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound. I stood there for a long moment. I was alone. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and pushed open the heavy glass door to the terrace. The wind was strong up here, 47 stories above the street. It whipped my hair around my face, cold and bracing. I walked to the railing and looked down. I could see the tiny dots of cars, the ant-like movement of people. Somewhere down there, Reuben was slipping into a black car, running from the wreckage of his life. Somewhere down there, Lila was staring at her phone, realizing that her golden ticket had just been canceled. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of ozone and exhaust, but to me, it smelled like oxygen. I pulled out my phone. I opened a text to Tessa. One word, I opened a text to Helena. I wrote, "I have the signatures. I will bring the hard copies to your office this afternoon." Then I put the phone in my pocket. I turned back to the apartment. It was beautiful. It was quiet. It was mine. Reuben had bought this place to hide a secret. He had furnished it to impress a mistress. He had designed it to be the ultimate symbol of his power. But as I walked back inside and ran my hand along the back of the velvet sofa, I realized the truth. He thought he was hiding a penthouse for her, but all along, he was just preparing it for me. The elevator chimed softly. I walked over to the panel. Luis's voice came through the speaker, warm and respectful. "Mrs. Rivera," he asked. "Yes. Luis? Mr. Ruiz has left the building," he said. "The perimeter is clear." "Thank you." "Luis?" There was a brief pause, and then he spoke again. "Welcome home, Mrs. Rivera." I smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached my eyes. "Thank you." "Luis," I said, "it is good to be home." I cut the connection. I stood in the center of the 4-bedroom penthouse, the doorman knowing my name, the deed in my name, and the future entirely my own. I was not the wife of a billionaire anymore. I was Madeline Rivera, and I had just closed the biggest deal of my life. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts. Do not forget to subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories. Like this video, and hit the hype button so more people can hear this story.